The Warren Commission determined in 1964 that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. How did it get it so wrong?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why the Warren Commission report was faulty. One of them was that they relied about 80% of their work was based upon the work of the FBI. And the FBI, of course, did not do a very thorough investigation. To put it mildly, J. Edgar Hoover was head of the FBI, was not on really friendly terms with Bobby Kennedy, who was at that time was about to resign, but he was the Attorney General. All right. And if you recall, this is very interesting. That weekend, Kennedy was killed on a Friday. That weekend, J. Edgar Hoover went to the racetrack. In other words, he didn't even come into work on Saturday. He actually went to the racetrack with his second in command, Clyde Tolson. So it was not, but again, I'm being mild. It was not a very thorough investigation
Mm.
by the FBI for a lot of different reasons.
Why has some of these files been kept secret for so long? The FBI says it's discovered now 2,400 new documents related to JFK's assassination. What are you expecting from them?
I'm really glad you brought this up because those 2,400 documents that the FBI has just found, those were not even previously reported. Everything was supposed to be declassified by 94 to 98 by the review board. Apparently, they didn't even know about these documents. I think we're going to find out a lot more about Oswald in New Orleans. And I think we're going to learn something about Oswald's reported visit to Mexico City, which was about in late September, early October of 1963. All right. And he was, of course, in New Orleans that summer before going to Mexico City. Oswald was, to put it mildly, a very, very interesting character, which the Warren Commission never even scraped the surface of. All right. Most people today who have studied this case
Mm.
don't believe the Warren Commission verdict about him being a communist. All right. They think he was some kind of low level intelligence agent.
What do you make of the assessments that are out there? There are a few that it was a foreign adversary, or the mafia, or the CIA. Seeing a lot of the theories that are exposed and all the research and investigating that you've done. What's your assessment of them?
I think that the most logical conclusion today, and that which most people who have researched this case believe, that it was kind of like a triangular kind of a plot involving the Central Intelligence Agency at one point, the Cuban exiles at another point, and then when Oswald was not killed the day of the assassination, the CIA brought in its ally, that is organized crime, who they have been trying to knock off Castro before, and they brought in the mafia to go ahead and send Jack Ruby in to silence Oswald.
Donald Trump promised that he would declassify the files during his first term, but he was visited by the CIA, I should say, the FBI, and was told by Mike Pompeo not to open them. Why do you think he delayed opening up the files?
That's a very interesting question because a week or so before, Trump had tweeted that I'm looking forward, to declassifying the last of the JFK documents. Then the very day he was supposed to do this, he's visited by the CIA and the FBI, and he backs out of it.
Mm.
Now, according to his talk with Andrew Napolitano, he said words of the effect that if they would have shown you what they showed me, you wouldn't have done it either. And Andrew said, "Who is they? And what was it they showed you?" Okay, And then Trump said, "Well, next time I talk to you, when there's not 15 people around, I'll tell you what that meant." So he's never explained exactly what it was. All right, that gave him pause. The implication is that it didn't look very good for the Warren Commission, but we don't really know that. But the fact that they both went in there on the last day and they warned him not to do it, I think that's a very, very revealing kind of situation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It just makes you wonder why the truth was covered up for so long. And do you think that trust will be restored in the government when these files are made public?
Well, I'm sure you're aware of this. 65% of the public does not believe the official story on the JFK assassination. And a lot of social scientists believe that the lack of the belief in government today, which is very low, and the lack of the belief in the media, which is almost as low, a lot of them attribute this to the 1963, 1964 events. They trace the fall of the belief in government and the media because it began in 1964 when the Warren Commission report was first issued. And it was so vigorously defended by the mainstream media in the United States, and this includes CBS, NBC, and the New York Times. So hopefully, we'll get some restoration of this when all these files are finally out there in the open, and perhaps when Representative Luna's investigation takes place in an open environment. One of the worst things about the Warren Commission is that it was all closed hearings. So this contributed to the cynicism
Mm.
about their verdict.
It's interesting you bring up the media. I wanted to get your assessment on what role the mainstream media really played in covering up the truth, I suppose. Has it been frustrating for you hearing a narrative on repeat that's possibly not the truth?
It's always been my belief that the main obstruction between the American public and the truth about the JFK case is what is termed today the mainstream media. Because from the very beginning, 1963 and 1964, the mainstream media was out there, okay, defending the Warren Commission verdict. To give you one very good example, in the fall of 1964, on the day the Warren Commission report was issued, both NBC and CBS broadcast shows endorsing its verdict. Now, Gabriella, the Warren Commission report is 888 pages long. How could you possibly read that many pages in one day and then report its contents without even referring to the evidence behind it? Because that wasn't released until a month later. And this is what I believe that has contributed to this air of cynicism about the media. They were reporting on something they couldn't fact check. It
Mm.
would be impossible to fact check it.
It's interesting, you're expecting quite a bit from these files. Do you think there's, as you say, 65% of Americans don't believe that the Warren Commission got it right? Is there going to be much in here that's going to shock us?
I really, I wish I could say one way or the other, but since I'm supposed to be a responsible kind of a person, without reading this stuff, I can't really say that. Now, I do know people have gone down to Washington, like Andrew Eiler, okay, and a lawyer from up in Canada, and he told me that a lot of these closed files deal with Oswald in Mexico City. And let me add one last thing about this subject. The review board, which expired in 1998, made what is called a final determination on all the documents that they saw, which means that they all should have been declassified in October of 2017. If the agency made a final determination, that's what that means. So the question is, why are we here in 2025 still debating about these documents that should have been declassified almost 8 years ago?
Hmm.
This is what gives people an air of cynicism and skepticism about this case.
Absolutely. Look, when we do finally get the truth, what does this mean for RFK Jr., for the whole Kennedy family?
Well, that's a very good question. Also, Bobby Kennedy Sr. Okay, never believed the official story, and his son, Robert Kennedy Jr., he has never believed the official story
Mm.
about what happened to his uncle. And I think that when all this stuff comes out, finally, you know, the they're going to both be vindicated on this subject. All right. Also, I should say one other thing, and this isn't commonly known. John F. Kennedy Jr., JFK's only son, never believed the official story either. Okay. And according to an old girlfriend of his that doesn't like to talk about it, but she does write letters, one of his goals was to enter the political arena and try to find justice for what really happened to his father.
Mm.
Now, that's a very interesting story, which I believe is largely true, that very few people know about.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It'll be really interesting to see what happens, and importantly for that family. The task force aimed at exposing federal secrets is also going to investigate the assassinations of RFK and MLK. It's also going to look at the Epstein client list, the origins of COVID-19, UFOs, the 9/11 files. There's so much that we're going to learn about. What are you expecting from these other cases?
I I thought that was really interesting. I mean, there's such a thing as picking up too much that you can carry. That's a lot of very serious cases for one committee to go into. Can you possibly do justice? I think it's 7 or 8 cases to all those things. But if they do, and if they do find that something is faulty every place, well, then this really gives questions about the mainstream media, and also our American historians who seem to have been afraid to go into all the details about all of these cases, which the MLK, RFK, and JFK cases were really instrumental in what happened to America in the 60s. There would have been no Vietnam War if those three men had lived, which means about 58,000 Americans would be alive today and about 3 million Vietnamese. So there's a whole change, a shift in the historical focus if those three people were killed by conspiracies.
Where we are today in 2025, we are finally getting some truth, more transparency. Do you have faith going forward about the government in the US? Do you expect there could be other instances being covered up in the future?
Well, if it depends a lot on this congressional committee. If these things are done in the open, and if they're done with the best information that we have, and the committee members are really honest about their job, I think it might have a significant impact, going forward. And I
Mm.
think it'll be interesting to watch this. And Gabrielle, I think one thing to look for is how much pressure from the outside is put on this committee, because the MSM has a lot to lose if she comes out of the gate really swinging strong. Okay, their credibility is going to be on the line. So that will be a very interesting tell about how that committee is going to deal with the pressures from the outside. They really don't want this to happen.
Mm. James DiEugenio, thank you so much for your time. How can we stay up to date with your work?
Okay, I'm at kennedysandking.com. That's my website. And I have a Substack under my name also. So that's how you can read the most current information in this case. Thank you very much for having me on.
Really appreciate you coming on the program. We'll speak to you again soon.
Okay, bye bye.
Thanks, James.